I can distinctly smell gun smoke and pancakes. Are there any Americans here?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Anyone here from Canada? Yeah. Yeah, oh dear. What about Europe? Anyone from Europe? Yeah. Great Britain?
Yay!
Don't consider yourself part of Europe, no? Anyone in from London?
Yeah.
Whereabouts?
West London, Ealing.
Ealing.
Yeah.
Lovely. Doesn't matter where you're from, you're most welcome here to Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. My name is Mark. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
For the next 5 hours, I'm going to be your guide. A little despair on that child's face. I'm going to take you for a tour of the tower. I'm going to point out some historic buildings. I'll be telling you stories relating to the building. Stories, ladies and gentlemen, not necessarily the truth. I don't want anyone coming up to me later on going, oh, I think you'll find it's the Duke of Norfolk. Because I think you'll find I don't care. Our story begins way back in 1066 when William the Duke of Normandy, now known as William the Conqueror, defeated the Anglo-Saxon King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. Yeah, not quite so many of you joined in on that one. Someone very proudly shouted Waterloo yesterday. Anyone here from France? Anyone here from France?
It's starting to rain.
Good. William was crowned King William I on Christmas Day of that year, but he had to continue to fight his Saxon subjects as they did not take kindly to Norman domination. And William was looking for somewhere to build a citadel to impress and dominate the citizens of London. And he chose a site just inside the eastern city walls where once a Roman fort had stood. In 1078, he authorised the building of his first Norman palace and fortress in this country. Today we refer to it as the White Tower. It's behind those buildings. Don't bother looking. It's behind those buildings. Over the next 200 years, successive monarchs continued to add to the tower's defences. The inner bailey or defensive wall, containing 13 smaller towers, was constructed in around 1220. The outer wall was completed in 1280 and has 6 more towers, all of which face south to defend against an attack should it come from the river. Another part of the tower's defences was a moat, which you're now standing in. This was dug during the reign of King Edward I and was once filled with water, and it was designed to make use of the tidal flow of the River Thames. For twice a day at high tide, the river would flow in and around the moat to flush it clean. Does that sound like a good idea? It didn't work. Over time, all the rubbish, raw human sewage, that's poo, dead animals, dead tourists, flowed downstream into our moat and sink to the bottom. And over time, we'd successfully created the largest cesspit in Europe. This situation continued for 500 years. Imagine what it must have smelt like on a warm summer's day. Best line of defence we ever had. In 1843, it got so bad they filled it in with sand and shingle to the level that you see it today. Now, as I said earlier, this was the first royal palace and fortress of its kind to be built anywhere in England, but over the years it's been employed in many other ways. For example, this is still the place where we keep safe the crown jewels and royal regalia, and has been since 1303. This was the location of the Royal Mint, where all the coins of the British Empire.
Sad.
Right. If you come from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa or Canada, if you come from quite a lot of Africa, the Middle East, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, if you come from quite a lot of Asia, some parts of China, the Caribbean, and lots of other islands dotted around the world, including the United Kingdom and ERA. At one point or other, you've been part of the British Empire. And therefore, I'd like you to join me in an enthusiastic and rousing huzzah. Something like this. British Empire, huzzah! Let's have a go then. British Empire, huzzah! Very good. Now let's hear the Americans have a go. Rubbish. By the way, you don't get to say huzzah either. You made your point. You made your choice. However, we've been getting on so well recently, I'm willing to give to you yeehaw. You can have a yee. That's it, yeah, close enough. Right, so let's try that again. But this time, no Americans. All of those of you from the British Empire? Americans?
Yeehaw!
And that's why you'll never have an empire. We used to have a prison here, state prison. There it is, the bars to prove it. A very famous prison. Anyone here from Australia? Welcome home. This was a place of murder, a place of torture, and a place of execution. Now, talking of executions, please look over there. There you can see a large, prominent grey building with ornate naked statues. That beautiful building was built in 1915 for the Port of London Authority, and as such has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the Tower of London. But it does serve as a useful landmark, so let me tell you about a place below and to the right. But when you go up there, you'll find a garden. If you go in those gardens, you'll find a big plaque, and that plaque tells you that that's the old execution site. Many people died up there between the 14th and 18th century. In fact, 75 men of noble birth were to lose their heads up there by means of block and axe. Now, just for a moment, let's pause and imagine the scene up there on the day of an execution. Thousands of bloodthirsty, unwashed, stinking peasants from Ealing and many other London boroughs would have gathered up there for a day of fun and festivity. Fun! They'd have brought the kids, they'd have brought a picnic basket, they'd be watching the jugglers, the fire eaters, the dancing bears and the men on stilts. Everyone was having a super time. Except for one. The condemned man would have been led out of one of our buildings, be dragged along here in his finest clothes, and up the hill the booing and jeering crowds and people pelting with fruit and vegetables. When he gets to the top, he's got to climb the big wooden steps. At the top of those wooden steps, he's met by a giant of a man, dressed all in black leather. Calm down, madam. Not what you think. You can still buy that gear in some parts of Ealing in those special shops. Now, the condemned man would hand over a purse full of gold or silver coins to that executioner, just to make sure the job was done well. And then he'd have a big speech, he'd say his prayers and place himself down with his neck resting on a block of oak. He'd give a word or a signal. The executioner would pick up the heavy clumsy axe and bring it crashing down through that poor unfortunate soul's neck. There'd be an ooh from the crowd. Ooh. There'd be a gush of blood. The executioner would bend down, pick up that severed and still bleeding head by the hair. The executioner would bend down, pick up that severed and still bleeding head by the hair, hold it aloft for all to see, and loudly proclaim, "Behold, the head of a traitor! So die all traitors! God save the king!" And the crowd would go wild and cheer. Get off. That was pathetic. And the crowd will go wild and cheer! Buy a ticket. The head would be impaled on a pike and carried through the streets of London to London Bridge, which in those days was the only bridge across the River Thames. The head would then be left displayed upon the gateway entrance, a sign of the fate that would await all would-be traitors. Now the headless corpse would be taken down, placed into a small hand cart and brought back into the tower. It would trundle up through the archways and up to the Chapel Royal, where it would be quickly buried inside the chapel in an unmarked grave. Now we're going to follow the route of that blood-soaked cart. We're going to walk in the footsteps of some people who have changed the world. People like King Henry VIII, people like Queen Anne Boleyn, people like Sir Walter Raleigh. Are you ready to embark on a gruesome, gory journey of over 900 years? Yeah! Cool, let's go.